John Derringer, what are you going to ask us now?
Carl, I'm going to ask you so many questions. You're going to be really tired of this in about a half an hour. First of all, let's introduce the guys, and we'll start with the man in the middle there. That is a vocalist, guitar player, songwriter, all-around good guy, Carl Dixon. We have the gentleman who couldn't negotiate 6 strings, so he only plays 4. Vocals and bass, Curran. The man whose style is right in his name, Thumper Ketchum. And I'm sure it's still the new guy, although it's been quite some time, about 10 years, and a guy who has played not only with his own band, with some of Canada's great rock artists, Sean Kelly on guitar. So we're going to go through not only the many of the songs on the first album that you know of, but also talk about the band, how they came together, and I guess that's the place to start. And maybe Dave, we'll start with you, buddy. You've got the microphone there, and I know you were, I think it was like 1979 that you, what became Coney Hatch you got involved with, so what's the story?
Well, yeah,
you surprised him.
Hello? Is this thing on?
Dave wasn't expecting to go first.
I wasn't expecting to go at all. I got to hide back here while you guys talk. Yeah, I was playing around in some different bands and playing with a guy that knew Andy, and so met up with Andy and Paul Vandermortel and some guy that never even did any shows with us.
I thought we went to art school in Britain together. Is that not how we started?
No,
I actually can't remember the very first bass guitar history we had, but it started with you, myself, Paul Vandermortel, right?
Right. And we got Andy Godlewski from one of my old bands. Fast Andy Godlewski.
Good Scottish name, Godlewski.
And then, as was the way things were back then, and try explaining this to a 20-year-old, classified in the Toronto Star.
Yeah. That's how we got Steve Shelski, and we especially liked him because he owned his own PA and light system.
So he got the job because he had PA and
The old
light.
Redwood.
The man was a shoo-in.
The only thing better would be if you owned a truck as well.
But actually, in the Toronto Star, they had a classified, there was a section for...
Section 635, dramatic musical talent.
Musical talent. He knows.
Awesome, Carl.
That's how they got me as well.
I was going to say, not only did Shelski come from the Toronto Star, but Mr. Dixon answered the ad too, so...
Not at the same time. He answered his ad much earlier than I answered mine.
Like Tinder for the rock world. Skip.
So how long before you start recording the album, and we'll certainly talk about that, how long before the recording of the album do you guys become Coney Hatch?
I think Andy and I, a year and a half maybe?
Yeah,
Ish.
we call it the peanut butter days. So we were playing everywhere from, North Bay, Kapuskasing, Thunder Bay, where Dave lives now, Val-d'Or, Quebec, and we're lucky if we were making $50 a week, and that was a good week for us.
And we played 6 nights a week. Sunday was our travel day. We'd set up when we got there, and you played Monday to Saturday, every night, and then rinse and repeat. Off you go, next place on this.
Guys, everybody's going to envy us if you keep talking like this.
Well, and we got to talk about some of the absolute dumps that you guys played in, because there was a circuit and all the bands had to play that circuit. Some incredible shitholes, but you made it through. My favorites are the places that were strippers during the day and then a rock band at night.
No, but they did not call themselves strippers, they were entertainers.
Exotic entertainers.
They would come to our shows and say, we're entertainers too. And we're like, yeah.
Okay, so tell you what, why don't you play, we'll set up track 2, You Ain't Got Me.
Well, You Ain't Got Me. I was in the band maybe a month. I didn't have a place to live for the first, 6 months to a year.
He wasn't living with me.
Living in the van down my
Oh,
road.
I stayed at your house long enough to give your grandmother chicken pox. That was it. And your little brother. Wow.
Who's here tonight, by the way?
But
One break in and we're already violating HIPAA laws. Awesome.
yeah. So I was couch surfing at a friend's house, a guy named Howard Bagley, who was a CBC cameraman for many years. And he was a friend, so he lived near High Park. I was staying at his place, and I just had this idea for a song. We just emerged from the new wave, sort of second post-punk era, and Andy liked a lot of that stuff, and I just had this dun 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 kind of, and I feel, oh yeah, I want to make a song like that. And then I recently broken up, call it, with a girl. Wow.
Which is
Is that
this is a running theme with Coney Hatch. Even a girl, break up with a girl.
Yes, and demonize her in a song. It's just not fair. So I had this thing, and I was sitting at his house late one night, and I just started writing these words. In case you haven't noticed yet, it's over. And then I put it together with the beat, and away you go. You got a song.
You Ain't Got Me.
Okay, before we do this, I'm
Yes.
going to just say one quick thing. Carl Dixon and I are huge hockey fans, as is Sean Kelly. And as we play this song, and we play the chorus, You Ain't Got Me, you sing along Lou Angotti, who is a number 6 on the Chicago Blackhawks. We used to sing that in sound check. We'd sing, Lou Angotti. Anyway, that's a hockey story.
It doesn't diminish the enjoyment of the song at all.
True story. Sing along, Lou Angotti.
Okay, so nice and easy does it, right, fellas?
Aaron and Helix. You played with a lot of great Canadian artists, but you were like a fan of the band back in the early 80s. What were your thoughts, and how much did you love the album when it came out?
Well, I'll tell you, the first time I heard Coney Hatch, I'm from North Bay, Ontario. Northern Lights roller rink. I had the pleasure of having my elementary school beside the bus station in North Bay. So there was some transient behavior happening, and yeah, so it was on the wrong side of town, as Andy Curran would say. But Northern Lights, they used to have promoters come by the schoolyard, and you'd see some shifty dude, in a little skinny leather jacket, little pencil mustache, and he'd hand out free passes to Northern Lights roller rink. So that was the coolest place you could be. And I distinctly remember hearing the strains of, now, is it okay if I say what song it is out of order? Yeah, Monkey Bars. This is really adding to the feeling of danger, excitement, and the feeling I shouldn't be doing any of this, but I love it all. So that was my exposure to Coney Hatch. And then, of course, those compilation cassettes came out. I think Devil's Deck was on one of those quality records. K-Tel, yeah, it was a K-Tel one. And so, from there, I just kind of, I was my early days of getting into hard rock, right? This is like, even before I got into like Def Leppard or Quiet Riot, Coney Hatch was making that impact. And yeah, pretty soon, I wasn't thinking about playing hockey arenas, I wanted to play rock arenas. Which is good because I sucked at hockey.
What's it like to play the tunes now?
It's amazing. It's like that movie Rockstar. I grew up with pictures of these guys on my wall, and now I'm one of them. That is very true. And it's, when you're playing with musicians like this, never mind, being a fan of the band, just how good this band is live. It's such an honor to play them. And it translates on acoustic too, am I right?
Well, and you mentioned Devil's Deck, the first tune, and that was a kind of a weird time in North America because it was about a year after MTV went on the air, but Much Music still wasn't, it didn't come on until '84. So video was big and it was huge if you wanted to break into the States, but it was not yet a thing so much here in Canada. But the video did get on MTV, didn't it?
Yeah, it was an interesting time because if you could imagine, MTV started and they were begging record companies for videos. They called Anthem Records and said, we need some videos. They just started and you're like, are you serious? Like, when MTV hit, to try to get your song on MTV was literally impossible unless you were a top 10 artist. But at this point, they were calling everybody, soliciting them, and then by the time we were on the Judas Priest tour, that was what actually catapulted it, was the airplay on MTV. And I remember Carl and I being like Long Island somewhere, and we would arrive at the Holiday Inn at 1 a.m. and we put the TV on, and it's like, holy shit, they're playing Coney Hatch on MTV. It was pretty cool.
A long way from the Gasworks.
Yes, indeed.
All right, so let's get to Stand Up, and we'll come back with track 3, Stand Up, Coney Hatch.
We thought we'd ask Sean Kelly to play a little bit of swampy slide guitar, because we thought for tonight we would, obviously a lot of you have seen us many, many times before. We go to our martial amps and we just roll them all to 12 and just go, right? So this is a bit of a different vibe, and thank you guys for being so cool and showing up tonight. And being open to hearing the Hatch in a different... snake in the grass in your 42nd wife? Do you know who you are? You might be fast, but you never go far. Stand up and say what you want. Take the money and run. You got the gun to your head, but you're busy having fun. You read like a book. I hit her in the end 'cause you killed another crook. Bang, bang. Stand up. Say what you want. Stand up. Say what you want. Then you sit in the crowd. And you woke from a dream 'cause the clock's too loud. Stand up. Say what you want. Stand up. When I'm talking to you, boy. Say what you want. Thank you very much. I thought you were coming, man. I'm going to grab the mic here before John does because I actually want to tell you a little bit about our esteemed host here. He's not just some schlep that we picked up hitchhiking on the Gardner.
No, he's a schlep that made his own lane.
No, I brought some. I brought
You wouldn't
some.
believe what I had to promise them.
I brought some notes here because I think it's important. You know, John's amazing career in radio started back at the CFTR back in 1979. He went on to Edmonton. I think the station was called K97 in the early 80s, and I think that's probably when he first heard our music. But he went on to work at Q107, Show FM in Montreal, the Fan 590 before returning to the mighty Q in the early 2000s.
And then one day I woke up and I didn't work there anymore.
Okay, we'll skip that part because I got some good shit to tell you about John. Here's a few stats on our buddy here. In 2004, John Derringer launched an all-day fundraising drive to benefit the family of Louise Russo, a 45-year-old mother of 3 who was hit by a stray bullet while ordering a sandwich in Toronto at a restaurant, leaving her paralyzed. Through John's efforts, they raised $218,000 for that family. Every year after that, John, a motorcycle enthusiast, leads the BAD ride, B-A-D ride, for charity to benefit the distressed centers of Toronto. In addition, in 2012, John received the Alan Waters Lifetime Achievement Award and was inducted into the Canadian Broadcast Industry Hall of Fame. 2012, John received the
Alan Waters Lifetime Achievement Award and was inducted in, I said that already. That same year, he also received the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Medal.
Is this going to stop before 2022?
Yeah, it is. It is. And that was at the Canadian Centre for the Abuse Awareness. And Christmas 2000, the Derringer 13 Days of Christmas fundraising raised approximately $9 million for the Queen's